Good evening, everyone. Well, we got a nice little soft focus thing kind of going on there. It is Friday night, and I am back with another BS and a beer. And to show that it's not always very old stuff that I drink, I actually have something that is relatively fresh. I picked it up at one of the local gas stations the other day. This, if I can get it to actually focus properly, let's see. Yes, we can. This is Alai IPA from Cigar City Brewing in Tampa, Florida. And I just want to, oops, there we go. Let's just address the elephant in the room. 19.2, come on, why are you being like this? 19.2 fluid ounces. Why? Now, I know there's some measurements that will translate from, imperial over to metric a lot easier. Like, you'll see some of the bigger bottles of beer that are 25.4 ounces, and that makes sense because that translates to 750 milliliters. But if we take a look at this, here's where it gets extra unfortunate. It's 1 pint, 3.2 fluid ounces, or 568 milliliters. That is not an even thing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know. That's just one of those things. It's just very odd to me. Like, why not 20 ounces? But, tappity tap tap, we've got an American IPA. The IPA standing for India Pale Ale, and we shall pour it into our little Tulip glass so it can encapsulate the delightful aroma of the beer. We'll leave a little bit in there because it's going to foam up like that. The IPA, originally, the initial theory was that it was designed for transport, in regard, with the British East India Company for transporting so sailors could drink it on the voyages, because without the additional hops it would spoil fast. Half true. It wasn't so much for the sailors, but it was for exporting, so breweries would have their beers a little more heavily hopped so they could export them from England to India, and everybody thought it was just these, but no, actually they did some darker beers, some porters as well were exported from England to not only India, but also to California. And then, so we're talking mid-18th century, and then the style kind of fell out of fashion after the British East India Company went out. But it came back really around the 1970s or 1980s with the American IPA, which is more... American hops are more, as they say, citrusy and pine resiny, whereas the English ones are more herbal and floral. So now, I'm going to get everything situated over here. I'm going to have some beer, and we're going to talk a few things, and I'm glad I'm doing a can because it is part of it. So, one moment. Hello, we're back over here now. The foam has calmed down. But let's see. Yes, so, like I say, and I've got some notes here, but they're all out of place because I pulled an audible before I came over here. The American hops, this definitely has that citrusy flavor, like kind of grapefruity type thing, which I really like. It does tend to cut down on the bitterness, which is unfortunately one of the things that you're going to have with hops. It's just the nature of the plant. But that pine resiny, aka that dank and earthy thing. Shout out to Cole. I saw your comment from last week. But let's have a sip. And again, fresh, non-vintage, not 10 plus years old. This is fresh. Let's see if it actually has a date. Canned on February the 28th, 2025. I would show you that, but there's still beer in there, and it would go all over me, and I would have to do a little more cleaning than I actually wanted to tonight. Whoops, let's lower this a little more. There we go. So cheers to that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the more prevalent beer myths, and then something hopefully funny to end it on. So, sip a beer. Ooh, that's nice. Not as citrusy tasting as it smells, but still good. A little bit of that bitterness, and it is, as you can see right there, 7.5%, so a little more than your standard brew. We've all heard a lot of the myths surrounding beer, especially people of a certain age growing up. And I was actually talking to my dad about this earlier Actually, earlier today, as I'm filming this, we were talking about Jägermeister of all things, and that's something I wanted to bring up because there is that one old school prevailing myth that all beer should be served as cold as humanly possible. You know, if you remember a few years ago, well, actually longer than a few years ago, Coors Light did that whole thing with the cans and the mountains that would turn blue when it reached the optimal drinking temperature. I think it was set around 34 degrees Fahrenheit, so what's that, about 1 Celsius or something? Give or take 1 or 2. But the thing is, they wanted you to drink those, what they call American macro lagers, so your Budweisers, Coors, Millers, things like that. They say to drink them as cold as possible because the colder something is, the less taste it has. And that was the whole point behind Jägermeister, which, as I described it to my dad, and I've described it for years, it's like you took every bar rag in America at the end of the night and wrung it out into a bucket. That's Jägermeister. And they want that served ice cold because it kills the taste. So, yeah, biggest beer myth right there. No, the beer doesn't have to be ice cold. And since we had the can, one of the things that I always used to hear, especially from a lot of the old timers, was that canned beer tastes worse than bottled beer. Canned beer is not good for you. I even had some of the older guys go as far as to say that canned beer, they said, oh, canned beer, you can't do that. You're going to end up with Alzheimer's. And my simple response to that, well, number one, obviously it's not true. But what I wanted to, I would always say to them, like, well, have you ever gone to a bar? Have you ever had a draft beer? What's a keg except basically a really, really big can? So, but that's one. No, and actually the thing about the cans is it's better. It's easier to ship, number one. Easier to store, number two. Airtight. Keeps out the sunlight, which we're going to get to in a minute. Plus, because it's aluminum rather than glass, it is infinitely recyclable. Cans are the way forward. And then another good one, and this is one that I always loved to hear, and I still hear people talking about it. Hold on. Pause for, a pause for the drink. Pause for the cause, as they say. God, that really does not drink like 7.5. Got a little bit of that bite, a little bit of that bitter beer bite. Still has a little sweetness at the front. You know, that would be... It's a little high to consider it a session beer, which is basically when you sit down and have beer after beer after beer, which, I don't do anymore. But it's a little too heavy for that. But speaking of that, you've all heard this one. It was especially prevalent around picnics, gatherings and parties and whatnot, where there would be beer in coolers. You get a beer cold and then warm and then cold. Any temperature fluctuation, that is going to skunk the beer. That is 100% incorrect. Temperature fluctuations, unless it's basically going from, well over 100 degrees immediately to below freezing, it's not going to cause any sort of skunking of the beer, which is where it gets that literally smells like, a skunk. And it's very bitter, very unpleasant. You see it a lot with some beers, and I'll get to that in a moment. The thing that makes the beer skunk is sunlight. Sunlight cannot get through a can. Unless the beer was badly made, canned beer is not going to skunk. You see it in bottled beers. More specifically, now think about this. Think about all the ones you've had in the past. The ones that are often the most skunked are the ones that are either in clear bottles, like Corona. I'm trying to think. I know Cerveza Sol still comes in the the clear bottles, completely colorless bottles. And then the green bottles, especially. Things like Heineken, St. Pauli Girl, Yingling, things like that. It's because the sunlight can get through the glass of the beer, Clear blocks no UV, green blocks some, the brown blocks a little bit, which is why the brown bottles last long, but that's the reason that beer skunks. Has nothing to do with it getting warm, getting cold. Trust me, it's okay. And then the last one, which is just complete and utter bogus nonsense. The old beer before liquor, never been sicker, liquor before beer, you're in the clear. Don't. Back in college, we tried it all. We experimented back then, so you didn't have to. It makes no difference. If you overconsume anything, you're not going to feel well. You are going to get hungover. And it's mainly, the complete dehydration because of the alcohol. And, that's the thing. People just would pass out, not have any water. Don't do it. Kids, younger kids, if you're watching this, don't do it. Take it from the one that did it way back in the lawless times. So, yeah, that's it. There's always those beer myths. And then we also had people that would argue with us, like Old Vienna. That was a beer back in, I still think it's around, but very prevalent Canadian macro lager. Old Vienna, they would just call it OV. We had the guys that would swear up and down because they used to make it in the 12-ounce bottles, but then they made splits. I don't think they make splits anymore, but there's like little 7-ounce bottles, little half bottles of beer. We had guys swear that the OV splits were a different beer than the regular OV, and they would refuse to buy anything other than the 7-ounce bottles. They wouldn't buy the 12s. We had plenty of those. We never had enough of the splits. I don't know. People just, I don't know. People get an idea in their head, and no matter what you tell them, they're not going to change it. But trust me on that. If you have a beer in the fridge, you put it on the counter, it gets warm, you put it back in the fridge, have the next day, not going to do anything. But if you put a bottle of beer out in direct sunlight, especially if it's a clear or green bottle, yeah, you're probably more than likely going to have some skunkitude in your future. And I want to wrap that up because Pastor Ken's Curveballs. He's running his 300 sub giveaway video. It goes on until August the 22nd. Link to that will be down below. Basically, he wants some dad jokes. Come on. So I thought, I've got a couple of them. So I figured that's a good way to close this off. Finish off the beer and the BS and beer session with some really horrific dad jokes. And I'm going to get... Styx G did a good video on that. And I definitely chortled on a few of them. Pause for the cause for a moment. All right. Good old dad jokes. The first ones I originally immediately thought of goes back to high school English. My 9th grade English teacher, Mr. Benedict, he started off with basically his trio of cow jokes. And it was all the deadpan. It's all in the delivery. So I present to you some terrible cow jokes and then a few others just before I get out of here. What do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef. What do you call a cow with 2 legs? Lean beef. Come on. Then, probably my favorite one, and it was a bit of a thinker. What do you call a cow after it just gives birth? Decaffeinated. Come on. They're so bad that you can't help but laugh. And for these jokes especially, I've got a good one. What do you call a factory that specializes in making basically middle-of-the-road stuff? A satisfactory. I know. I'm looking. Okay, we don't see the torches and pitchforks outside yet. But with this last one, I will raise this to you guys one more time. For the last joke, it goes like this. What do you call cheese that does not belong to you? Nacho cheese. Thank you and good night, everyone.